is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Red Sister, Book 1 of Book of the Ancestor series, chapters 5 through 8. In these chapters, there's a princess here. Well, she's at least a noble. They call her princess. I feel like I'm supposed to dislike her more than I do. Is she annoying? A little, in the way that people who have money are. But I don't hate her. And also, this training is brutal. No, thank you. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Huge thank you to Martin, who is here in the chat. Hello, Martin, for commissioning this episode. Martin got in just under the 2-month wire, and I really don't think, even if I had gotten this commission after the 2 months, that I would have had the heart to cancel this, because I really, really, really want to read more of it. So thank you, Martin, for that. And these chapters, I had to go back and refresh myself a little bit on what had happened before, because there's been such a passage of time. And these chapters do a nice job of actually recapping just enough that I was able to, it filled in some blanks that the quick skim of what I had read already was sort of filled in. And I am fascinated by the way this author is focusing on certain things. And it makes me really wonder about this author's personal history. So I don't know. At this, Martin says, I've got plenty more commissioned. Yay! I'm not the one who does the Airtable with the, it's got all of the dates of future episodes. I have Candace hired to take care of that. So a lot of times I'm not sure if something has been commissioned further or not when I'm recording on an episode. But some of you may have seen that I shared a couple of months ago after the first episode that the author was listening. Mark Lawrence was listening to the episode and retweeted and said that it was a good one. So I really feel some pressure here. And Mark Lawrence, I hope that you don't take it personally. If there are some times where I'm like, this author's full of shit, that doesn't ring true at all. Get the hell out of here. Because I am not going to not say that if I feel it's true. But there it is. Martin says, got some money from my late granddad, so I threw some of it at you. Oh, Martin, I'm sorry for your loss, but thank you very much for that. That feels like kind of I don't know, that's a nice thing. Thank you. So, okay, chapter 5. Now, here's what I mean when I say the way this author is writing about certain things that makes me sort of wonder about their history. The way this starts is, when hunger has been your lifelong companion, the smell of food is a physical thing, an assault, a seduction, a deep-sunk hook that will reel you in. Nona forgot about Sulari's anger. Now, the last chapter ended with Sulari basically being like, they fucking think you're the chosen one. They're full of shit. You're a hunska. This is bullshit. And I really feel this keeps coming up over and over again. And it could just be that the author is very tuned into their own character. But there is something about this that feels like the author knows what it means to go hungry. And if that is not true, if the author has not gone through this, good on you, because you really capture it. I have gone hungry only during a very short period of my life. Only a very short one. But it was brutal. And it is the sort of thing that if you have not experienced that, if you've never had to worry about there being enough to eat, it's a really difficult thing to get across the constant paranoia that causes. And even when I was younger and I had not yet experienced that, I don't know how many of you all have any sort of belief in past lives. But I'm somebody who, like, low-key thinks that's probably a thing, that our souls, like, renew and become new people, and we learn other lessons and continue to sort of refine our compassion and understanding by living multiple times. It just seems, like wasteful to just, you have a soul go through one life and then be done. Like, what's that? And that's, of course, only if you subscribe to the idea that there's a point to us being alive. And I have a deep suspicion that if I have had a past life, I really dealt with starvation in that life. Because even as a very small child, I remember watching my mother portion out dinner and zeroed in on the fact that my father got so much food and I didn't, and being really worried about it. And it wasn't like I was angry at her for doing that or angry at him. I was just so concerned, like, is that really right? Is that going to be enough? Like, and I maintain that part of that is still in me, and it's part of why I have always struggled with overeating. I'm heavy now, but even before I ever dealt with a weight problem, I always, like, whether food was going to be at events, whether there was going to be enough for everybody, all of that was like top of my mind. And I always, when I would like have parties and stuff, I would make far more food than was actually needed, and I still do. And there's just a sort of like, my world is very food centric in a way that isn't just about gluttony. It's truly about, there's an anxiety that comes with it. It's like, I don't know. And this comes up over and over again in these coming chapters. Nona is so used to being hungry and so used to not having enough that even later on when somebody decides not to share something with her, and it's not food, but even then, while it irritates her that they don't share, there's a part of her that really understands that when you reach a point you don't want to share anymore, that like you can have empathy and compassion for somebody else's need and still just be unable to like open your heart enough to possibly hurt yourself. And I mean, we'll get to that, but I just feel like there is a constant refrain through these chapters of not only having dealt with a lot of going hungry, but also constantly being cold, and realizing as she looks around at the people around her that they don't really get it. Some of them do, but it feels like she's really in the minority in terms of the harshness of the life that she led before she got here. And, you know, I like the fact that even when she sees this princess, the way everyone else talks about her is, Arabella is her name. Everyone else talks about her in really kind of condescending, dismissive tones. But we don't really get that from Nona, who one would think might be the first to have resentment towards her that has nothing to do with who Arabella is as a person, just where she comes from and how much she has. But Nona is more sort of weirdly, like, she's sort of objective in how she's studying Arabella's response to the world around her, in comparison with her own response, and noting how different Arabella's reactions to certain things are than hers would be because of how differently Arabella grew up and what her priorities are and what her concerns have been. And she does this in a detached way that doesn't really feel like it lays any blame on Arabella. It's sort of like accepting in a way that, of course, the way she sees all of this is going to be totally different. And at times even feels some sort of like sympathy in that, and it's amazing, but it shows a great amount of self-awareness. Arabella, she believes, hates her later on because of the issue with the belt, which we'll get to. And Nona's not even really like defending herself. She's pretty much like, yeah, she fucking hates me, man. That sucks. I probably would too, though. Sorry. Like, it's an interesting, it's so easy to have a character like this be easy to hate. And I love that maybe other people around her are falling victim to just immediately disliking somebody who grew up with things she didn't grow up with. But Nona's not quite doing that. And I don't feel like I'm not trying to say we shouldn't hate rich people, because to be honest, if people have a certain amount of money and others are literally barely getting by, I have a lot of trouble like giving any shits about other things that they go through in their lives that might be considered difficult, because they don't have to worry about basic survival shit. So my sympathy really only stretches so far. So I am not even really mad at Nona's friends, but I do find it remarkable that Nona can maintain this distance from everything to see it clearly enough. So anyway, that's my overall impressions of Nona from these chapters, but let's get into the actual recap. So we start off with Nona being brought in amongst everybody to eat, and there is a really strong reaction to her arrival. And it's interesting because at this point, and I will repeat that earlier at the end of the chapter, we hear Sulary say, "The chosen one, you're not her. She wouldn't be a skinny little Hunska." By the end of the next chapters, people are assuming it's Arabella that's the chosen one. Nobody has said to the students which one of them. It's all hearsay, but they all sort of seem to think it is about Nona when she arrives, and then once they see Arabella like in action during the fight, they're kind of like, you know what? Actually, maybe it's her. And I find this very interesting because so many books are written with there being a chosen one, with there being this sort of like a prophecy or whatever. And frequently it's really out of the gate, soup's obvious who the person is. And it's the main character, it's the protagonist, it's the one that we're reading about. And I'm not saying that I don't want Nona to be the chosen one, but I do kind of like that there's some doubt in my mind right now, because there is a possibility that Nona's just going to be like the chosen one sidekick. Like maybe, which wouldn't suck, honestly. I wouldn't mind reading an outside perspective of being friends with a chosen one, like a book written from Ron's perspective or Hermione's. Like, you know, I'm obviously in the context of Harry Potter here. I don't want to read one from Ron's perspective. I take it back. Ron sucks, but Hermione would be interesting. But I pretty much am sure it's going to be Nona in the end, and that everybody's being distracted by Arabella because she has she has a mix of blood that really makes her stand out. She's very beautiful, and she's just got a sort of like separateness because of the way she carries herself and the way she speaks that makes it a lot easier for everyone to see her as being elevated past normal humanhood. And I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be Nona anyway, and that's going to be meant to undercut what it looks like versus what you are. Okay. She comes in, and Sulary says, "Red class at the back, gray class next." Mystic, Sulary slapped the table immediately before them, and holy, she waved Nona away. "Go." Nona advanced into the room under the scrutiny of the girls by the doors, arms straight at her sides, hands in fists. Despite the crowd, she had never felt more alone. She bit her bottom lip hard enough to taste blood. Easing her jaw, she pressed her lips together in a thin, defiant line. Easing her jaw, I just said that. The conversation failed at each table as she passed. By the time she reached the fourth, the girls were there, turning their chairs to watch. So, poor Nona, I really appreciate that later on, it seems like she's making friends. But at this point, I was really worried that she was just going to be alone again, and I was, like, not excited about it. She's not the one. Sulary's voice cut across the room. She's the dirty peasant we saw earlier. Look at her. Ignoring her own command, the novice turned her attention to the plate before her, heaping it with bacon and bread. Nona's treacherous stomach chose that moment to rumble more loudly than she had thought possible. The laughter that followed made her cheeks blaze, and she stood, furious, staring at the floor, willing it to crack and burn. Instead, it was the laughter that cracked and fell into silence. So she's in the middle of this, like, sort of attack in front of everybody on her very first day, no friends, and sort of gets saved by the bell. She thinks, because it's Toxis men who come in, they are, you know, all in uniform and whatnot, that these people are here for her. And figures that, you know they hung the wrong girl. Hanged, I guess, right? And that they're coming here to fix their mistake. But no, they are here as escorts for Arabella. This description is really, like, and this is the ones where all of the other sisters say, as it was foretold. But Abbess Glass is like, maybe. They all jump completely onto the bandwagon that this is the chosen one. And Abbess Glass is the only one who's sort of like, I don't want us to be acting like that now. Like, there's this attitude of reverence already that is no doubt going to influence the way Arabella interacts with her teachers, right? Like, and Glass seems really not on board with that and seems to sort of try and cut that, like, you know, what do they call that? Nip it in the bud. That's the one. And she's, you know, we may be certain that novice Nona understands that it is impolite to point a knife at guests. I love that Nona is all the way over on this other side of the room, and she fucking knows. Like, this woman has the awareness to tell, in a room full of people, who's got a blade out and is ready to fight. So, Arabella is described as looking like a different kind of creature, set apart from the dull and dirty humans who scurried about the world. Her hair seemed to glow golden in the light that reached through the still open doors. Her traveling clothes were a wonder of brushed suede and fur-edged leather, with a magnificent dark red cape across her shoulders secured by a gold chain. Where others might be described by their collection of flaws, Arabella Jotsis' only identifying feature seemed to be that she was without blemish. Perhaps the ancestor looked like this, but people didn't. So, all right, I'm going to put this out there, and I'm not going to be mad if it doesn't turn out to be true. I will be a tiny bit disappointed. I really, really want there to be a hookup between Arabella and Nona. I want Nona and Arabella to be a couple. I'm just calling it right now. Like, I'm just saying it. I feel like the way that Nona looks at Arabella feels a little gay. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, girls can't be attracted. No, you know what I'm saying, y'all. There is a feeling here of like, there's something. And I want that to be true real, real bad. So I'm just going to, even if it turns out that they aren't, even if they don't get together, low key, they are together in my head. Even if they aren't really friends right now, it's coming and I am ready for it, and just putting that out there. So then we have a confrontation between Clara and Arabella. Clara is very, very unimpressed by Arabella. She says, you know, several things about how whether or not you're minor royalty, we don't try and treat anybody differently here based on what their titles are. Your father's title might let him crush honest men down in Verity, but up here fights are one-on-one, and it's skill that counts, not rank. Your father put himself in prison, Clara Gomal. He made a poor merchant and a worse thief. And when Clara's like, hey, don't talk like that, she says, basically, shut the fuck up. Your family used to be money grubbers. They don't even have money now. So now they're grubbers. And you just need to let it go. I'm going to have my breakfast. Bye. And honestly, I don't know what to think here because I don't know enough of what happened with Clara. And there is such a strong instinct in me to be like, well, yeah, if your dad, like, was a smuggler or something and broke the law, then you can't really be mad at her father for, like, enforcing what the laws are. But then I'm like, Natasha, look at how you feel about cops today and the fact that they are often used to, like, uphold an unjust system. And just because the guy was breaking the law, like, that does not necessarily mean that in, like, moral terms he was doing something wrong. So I want to know more about this so that I can really get on a side here, because I'm uncomfortable being bereft of the knowledge that I need in order to do that. It's sort of funny how much we want to take sides in things when we find out that there are two sides. Like, we really feel this urge to come down on one or the other so that we know what we identify as. And I'm even, like, right now, I just started playing Skyrim. And, you know, there's the whole thing with the Empire and the Stormcloaks. And I haven't chosen a side, and it's giving me anxiety. But it's been like a week, and I still haven't chosen because I'm just like, I don't know. Both of you seem terrible in your special ways. And she then sort of, like, she being Clara, sort of grabs up Nona as a means of, like, I don't know how I want to put this, but she sort of uses Nona as a, like, bit of leverage and says, oh, well, this girl's a total peasant. She's a Hunska and she's eating breakfast with you, and I'm sure you've got a problem with that. And tries to sort of make Arabella uncomfortable or make her say something, like, hurtful, I think, in order to maybe push Nona onto her own side. And Arabella does not really rise to the bait. She's just like, dude, I'm trying to eat. I don't know what you're trying to do, but you look silly, so stop it. And finally, Sulary tells Clara to sit down and shut up and work it out in a battle class, if that's what she feels like doing. But don't do this at breakfast. So Clara winds up sitting down and shutting up, but sort of invites Nona into her circle at this point because she wants other peasants, like, as backup to be... She's obviously seeing this as a class issue. And I'm extremely interested to see how things develop in Nona's mind, because at this point, she just seems not really invested in either side of this. And I feel like she's sort of where I'm at. But we'll see. So we get Nona eating breakfast and just being blown away by not only how good the food is, but how much of it there is. And she can't help but overeat because she's, like, not used to having enough to eat. And getting to do this is just getting to eat as much as she can eat. Just eating as much as she can is not a thing that she has almost ever been able to do. And so she overdoes it. And later on, when they wind up late to class because they were the last ones in the dining area, because she just had to keep eating, and she still doesn't manage to finish everything in front of her, and she's, like, really uncomfortable with that, with leaving food. It's like, I want somebody to reassure her and be like, girl, you know they aren't going to just throw that out, right? Like, probably that same food, if you don't eat it now, it's going to be out for lunch, or somebody else is going to eat it. Like, relax. Because she really seems to think that they're just going to, like, pour it into the dirt and stamp on it. And it's like, if she knew that it would all come back around and eventually be eaten, I think that she'd, like, calm down a tiny bit. So Clara is explaining to her what the different classes are that they're going to be having. Gaina's the youngest in the classes. She's still 9. Me and Ruli are 11. We'll probably move into Gray soon. That's class 2. So I don't know why I didn't realize how young these kids are, but damn, they're real small. Like, at one point, we hear that, like, Nona is only a couple of inches taller than Gaina, who's 9. So I think that means that Nona's, like, 10, and I've been picturing her low-key in my head as, like, 16, you know? Like, I don't even remember if in the first chapters we were told how old she is, but that went right out of my head in the months between reading then and now. So that was a bit of a, like, shock for me when I saw that. I was like, oh my God, seriously? But it does explain later why when she's, like, looking at that huge wrestler in the flashback, she only comes up to his hip. because otherwise that would just be really impossible. So she's told about how they have math and reading, history, geometry, and geography. She doesn't even know what that is. She doesn't know what geometry is, but she's so busy eating that she's not asking any questions. And those are all, regular school classes. I appreciate that this place covers that stuff. And then Martin says she said she's 9, but doesn't actually know how old she is. Okay, cool. Thank you. And then we have Blade this afternoon. We're doing unarmed, but later we learn knives and stars. The older ones learn swords and tactics and strategy, too. In Red class, everyone studies everything. Later on, the Holy Sisters do more academia and spirit classes. Martial Sisters do mostly Blade. Sisters of Discretion concentrate on Shade. Mystic Sisters spent their time learning Path. Everyone calls the Martial Sisters the Red Sisters, and the Mystic Sisters are holy witches, but don't let a nun hear you call them witches. So I am trying to figure this out. Sisters of Discretion concentrate on Shade. First of all, given the parlance of our times, concentrating on Shade feels fantastic, and low-key definitely want to be a Sister of Discretion, I'm just saying. Except it would be of indiscretion for me, almost guaranteed. But I feel like that means they're assassins, right? Like, they're stealthy and steal and slit throats and nobody notices, and then whoosh, they're gone, right? Like, I feel like. And then, Mystic Sisters are like seers, right? Claire kind of things. That's a reference to Sabriel, which I'm also reading right now. I'm reading Lyriel. But yeah, I feel like Sisters of Discretion is probably discretion feels like it's got to be code for just secretiveness, right? And I am not averse to fights. Like, I would love to actually get in a real fight at least one time in my life, given that I come out of it alive. But I am better at, I feel manipulation, probably, than I would be at, outright confrontation. So I feel like Sisters of Discretion would be better for me out of all 4 of these. And Nona, meanwhile, is just sort of eating and not really, focusing too much on what Clara is saying to her. She finally, has to stop eating and run because they're late for class, and she's so full that it, hurts to run. And when they get to the classroom, there's nobody there, and it's confusing to her. She's just like, wait, I thought we were going to be late. There's nobody here. Are we the first here? But then Clara looks out the window and is like, obviously they've gone out somewhere. So there's a little bit of a field trip happening here. And they, in the time before the class returns, stay looking at this globe that is sitting on the desk. There are a couple other things. There's a huge crystal. There's a couple of books and ledgers and things. And then there's the white ball and a brass stand. Now, this is a really clever way to do a little bit of exposition. This ball is a globe, and it has movable ice flows on it. Like, if you twist it a certain way, there's interlocking plates that sort of pull back so that you can see the areas of the world that were more livable when the ice was further back. So yeah, it's a globe. Clara reaches out to stop it spinning. We live here. And it says, without warning, she set one hand to the bottom of the globe and the other to the top, and with little effort rotated each in opposite directions. Smoothly and without noise, the lower part of the white surface began to retreat. Nona saw that it was not one piece, as she had imagined, but comprised many bladed parts that shuffled beneath each other like the feathers of a folding wing. In consequence, the cord-thin strip of color girdling the globe widened, first to a finger's width, then wider and wider, until Nona's whole hand couldn't cover it. The pattern of jewel-enameled blues and greens and browns fascinated her eye. That's the world 50,000 years ago, long before the tribes even came. All the people that lived across these lands pushed into this tiny corridor as the sun got old and weak. And Nona's like, they fit? And she's like, nah, they sure didn't. They killed each other until they made enough room. And really, it's alarming to realize how far along we are in this planet's lifespan, that there is a tiny, thin band. And that's what they're living in. They can literally look from one ice floe from the north to the one that's coming up from the south if they stand in the right place. And that is... Oh, Martin's having to leave. Bye, Martin. That is really scary. You know, I feel like this is what it's going to be like for us in a few years with our fucking climate change acceleration getting to the point that it has, is we're going to be able to like look at some shit in a way that we never thought we'd see in our lifetimes and be like, well, there's death right there. It's coming. Okay. So Claire's in the middle of explaining this all to her, and the headmistress for this class, a Mistress Academia, let's see, Sister Rule, the convent's Mistress Academia. That's right. So they have their name, Sister Rule, but then they have their title. So that is hers. And the nun is pretty severe and is just basically like, "What? How the fuck were you this late?" And Clara has to be like, "Nona was super hungry." And a couple of people sort of laugh, and the nun smacks the table with the yardstick to shut them up. But then she looks at Nona and is like, "All right, listen. Yeah, this girl, like, clearly has been starving. So, okay, I'll give you a pass this time, but, like, don't do it again." And they go to their seats, and Nona admits that she doesn't know what geography is. And some people look like they might laugh, but the sister is really approving and is like, "I appreciate that you just say that," because a lot of people aren't willing to admit that they don't know what the fuck is happening. And that really stunts their learning, because I don't know where to start if they don't know what it is. And explains what geography is and the study of basically the history of the land underneath us. And she says, "Our history is wide and we are narrow, so perhaps its lessons no longer fit. Cut your cloth to your measure, some say, but the history of the land has lessons more important than those of kings and dynasties. The history of the ice is written there, the tale of our dying sun etched into rock and glacier. These are the lessons we all live by, and when the moon fails, we will die by them too." Which, damn, okay, way to end chapter 6. That's intense. So, chapter 7... Nona is at lunch, and she is getting told by a couple of other people who, like, what the bells all signify, because there's a variety of different bells that get rung across the campus. There's the iron bell, which is for the sisters to tell them about prayers. And then there's a brass bell that tells them about what hour it is and what class or meal you have to go to at that point. Bray is a deep bell. Afternoon class is the 6th, lunch is 5th, dinner at 7. And we meet at this point Jula, who is a holy. She's like clearly going to be heading in the direction of being more of an academic. And I like the fact that we get this perspective. We get some kids that are way less into fighting and way more into, you know, the reading and learning aspect of this. And Nona sort of evaluates her, and we get a couple of different moments later on of Jula, like, grimacing at the idea of fighting or of, you know, doing anything that's a little bit more, like, physically based. She's just not very excited about it. But that does not mean she's not good at it, because once we get to the fights, you know, in Blade class, she holds her own. She's not, like, you know, she doesn't enjoy it, and she clearly doesn't get into the sort of headspace that, like, at a later point Nona does. But just because she is more focused on the one aspect doesn't mean that she doesn't put forth effort in the other. And so I'm interested in Jula, because she feels a little bit more balanced than Clara, Clara feels like she's full of anger, you know, and just really, like, longs to sort of get out there and fuck shit up. After Blade, you'll think you've met the hardest mistress, but Mistress Shade makes her seem gentle. Everyone calls her the Poisoner, or Mistress Poison, because she always has us grinding up stuff for one poison or another. She's supposed to teach us stealth, disguise, climbing, and traps, but it's always poison. Anyway, don't ever call her Mistress Poison. And then they talk about the bell called Betel. And it's almost always bad news and sounds very different from the others. And when they hear it, they have to go to the abbess's front door and wait. So obviously, we know we're going to hear that bell eventually, and I'll be curious to hear what that is. It's sort of like the horn that's blown at the wall in Song of Ice and Fire, where nobody has heard 3 blows of the horn, because that signifies walkers in like 400 years. But they finally hear the 3rd horn, like way, way on in the series, and what a momentous moment that is. And this doesn't feel quite at that level because it's not like mythical, but it's just a lot less frequent and usually doesn't bode well for everybody. So a couple of people are asking, I think it's Genna who asks, where it is that she came from. And Nona finds herself unwilling to really tell them. And later on, she tells them this story, which is not the story that we know about. And I really want to know where the fuck this came from. It is, I'm almost positive, completely invented, but it's so very specific that I'm extremely curious. Because I feel like it has to come from somewhere, I wonder so much about whether or not that's meant to be significant or not. We'll have to see. But at this point, Clara sort of cuts Genna off from asking, but they do come back around to it later on. So they go to the glasswater sinkhole after lunch before their blade class. And Nona, again, another of these moments, they dangle their legs over the edge of the sinkhole, and Nona is so frightened of losing her shoes, even though they're tied on very tightly, that she keeps her toes clenched while hanging her feet over the edge. Again, I love these little details that really make it clear how much her mind is always focused on keeping the little that she has. It's just everything has been so transient to her that she's worried at all times. And it's a shame. She's 9 years old, but there it is. So they all try to make her more comfortable with telling where she came from by telling where they came from. Jula says, "Mother died trying to give me a little brother. Father got very sad after that. And he basically told his daughter, I'm not good at doing this. I'm going to give you up because I think they'll be able to take care of you better than me." Which is one of those things that's simultaneously, maybe he's right, but also, did you even try, dude? Who knows? It doesn't sound like they were in total poverty and he was giving her up out of a total necessity. It just kind of sounds like he didn't feel like he wanted to do the job. "My dad ships convent wine across the Sea of Marne, but he wasn't paying the duty," Ruli grinned. "My uncles are all smugglers, too, the ones they haven't hanged. The abbess came to the trial and said she'd take me in. Dad had to agree, and it saved his neck." And Clara says, "On the first day, you tell why your parents didn't want you anymore. It's supposed to stop it hurting. Sharing does that. Later you hear everyone else's stories, and you know you're not the only one. If you'd ever been to prison, you'd know that's the first thing people do there. They tell what they did." Nona didn't like to say that she had been to prison, and that she hadn't needed to tell because the guards had shouted it out as they led her to her cell. Murderer. But as she opened her mouth to speak, she remembered the cruel things Arabella had said about Clara's father. He put himself in prison. And instead, she began to answer the question that she had been trying to avoid. Nona's story should have begun, "A juggler once came to my village. He was my first friend." She didn't start there, though. She started with a question of her own. "Did you ever have a dream that they were coming for you in the night?" "Who?" "Yes." Ruli lifted her head. "They?" "They. Them." They all have very different responses to this question. And she starts telling them a story, and that's how this is written. She told the girls a story, and though at first her words stumbled and she spoke as a peasant girl from the wild grey lands of the west, out where the emperor's name is rarely spoken and his enemies are closer than his palaces, she found her tongue and painted the girls' minds a picture that took hold of them all and wrapped them in a life they had never tasted or imagined. So this is my thing, is that it feels like she starts off telling them the real thing, but then when it's phrased like this, wrapping them in a life, painting a picture, it feels like it's being suggested to us that this is not true. At least not later. I don't know, though. Maybe it is. Like, it's just a curious... it's a moment that I'm left really unsure. And she's talking about having this, like, recurring nightmare that there are kids, like, singing this song about the focus moon and the light from it being really red. And the children are singing, and then all of a sudden they fall down at the same time. And she wakes up from this and feels that there is something there. And there is a man busting into her house. And long story short, her mother fights back and is, like, kind of badass, but does not survive. She gets killed. And Nona gets pulled and taken out into the woods, and the raiders make camp for the night. And while they're asleep, some guy, like a wild man with a wooden sword that's still, despite it being wood, sharp enough to chop a guy's head off, comes out of the trees and slaughters literally everybody but her. And eventually, a party that has come to search for some of the stolen kids catches up, and they feel a kind of a way about the fact that Nona is the only one left alive. The Palarthi lay dead, the man had gone, just me and the corpses. They had found me covered in blood with bodies all around in what they called the haunted wood. They brought me back, but the old women were already washing mother. And it didn't take long for the whispering to start. I don't know who said which first, but the first to hiss it at me was the smith's wife, Matha. She'd hated me since her little Billum tried to beat me with a stick, and I hurt him back. It didn't take long before they were all saying it, as if the Palarthi hadn't even come, as if the bodies in the forest hadn't belonged to men who killed my mother and dragged me off. I think they were angry that all of those stolen by the Palarthi, I was the only one they got back, the one they hadn't wanted in the first place. So I'm thinking about this now, and I'm realizing that the reason this doesn't sound true, and the reason this started with what she should have said was, there was a juggler and he was my only friend, is, I think what that's meant to signify is, that's the actual pertinent information about how she is who she is. But instead, she's telling the facts of what happened, which really don't add up to mattering in terms of what, like, how she has become the person she has, I believe is what the author's trying to say. So maybe I do think that this is exactly, I don't know. We'll see. It seems true. It feels true in its way. And so eventually, rather than, like, kill her, which is what they were considering doing, they decide to sell her. And they're in the middle, she's, like, sort of in the middle of getting to the next section of the story here about being picked up by this guy and where she was brought. And they sort of get interrupted because it's time for their next lesson. And Jula said, that's horrible. Ruli says, it's incredible. And Clara says, is it true? And no, this is really the main reason that makes me go, is it? Because Nona doesn't answer her. Nona's just heading off to the tower for their lesson and doesn't really want to, like, engage on that part. And I don't know if that's just because Nona is sort of withdrawn and doesn't want to talk about her past. And so having it be demanded of her that she tell them her past and then be forced to also defend what she says is maybe too much for her. But we'll see. So as they're heading inside to this next class, Jula says something about how she wonders who Nona paid her confirmation fee. And I love this line that Nona also didn't understand, but she didn't want to talk about it with them because it seemed like tempting fate. Yo, if that isn't the truest thing, people don't understand why, if you are struggling financially, there are certain bills that you just sort of try to pretend aren't there. But there is a piece of your brain that sort of is like trying to protect you from the reality of how little you have to get by when you don't have enough. And it is moments like this of like tempting fate where it does feel like you're at the whim of some sort of like capricious force. And who knows if you're going to be able to make it this week. We'll see, and I don't know. There was something that rang really, really true to me about that. So they are meeting up with Mistress Blade, and they have to get changed. And this is when the fateful thing with the belt happens. Mistress Blade is pretty strict. She tells them all that they need to go change, and whoever's last or takes too long is going to get their head shaved. She doesn't say last. She says any dawdling. And they have to go and find fighting habits. And each of these habits comes with a particular belt. And there's a moment where Gaina gets up in Nona's face about the tunic that she's picked being too big, because she knows that she and Nona are going to be paired with, for fighting. And she says, this one, it's going to be too big. If you make a mistake, it's going to make me look bad because you're my partner. And if you fail, I get punished. And if it happens, I'll take it out on you. And there's this really interesting moment where Nona snatches that tunic out of Gaina's hand, intent on wearing it anyway, no matter what this bitch says. But then she remembers how her friend Saida, her one friend that she had, died because she let her fury get control of her. Anger hadn't saved her. Winning hadn't saved her. Nona took the tunic 2 places along from the one she'd tried last and held it up against her. Good enough? Good enough. So, she's 9 years old and already applying shit she's learned in her life to what she's doing. And I feel like that's fucking decades ahead of where most people start doing that. I swear to God, guys, there are a couple of times that I can distinctly remember really being like, okay, I did this one thing this one time. It did not turn out how I wanted, so let me try something different this time. And in a minor sense, like, oh, I got burned when I did this. Maybe. But in terms of bigger life lessons, which that's a keep your anger in check. Keep your desire to overpower others in check. That's a big lesson. And that shit, I don't feel like I started to learn till I was like fucking 20. So, all right, maybe she's a chosen one just because she's fucking got a way better sense of self. So they head out, and Arabella is in the middle of like insulting them. And this is what I find so compelling about this, because she says something about pigs and cows, aiming a bright smile at the door as Nona and Gaina entered. All the novices laughed, a couple trying to hide it behind their hands. So that's just said. Nona set her teeth. She's like, aware that she's being made fun of. They change really quickly, and she sees that there's a belt that's just like on the floor. And she figures that probably somebody out there ran out and it fell off them. So she picks it up in an effort to be helpful. And they stand out waiting for like the rest of the class for quite a while. And they had been gonna be like in maybe a little bit of trouble because they were nearly last. But a few, it says like a whole minute passes before the others come out. And so it kind of eclipses their lateness. And Arabella is clutching the tunic closed because she can't find the belt. And the teacher says an inventive child would have taken a replacement from the stores and claimed it as hers. An attentive child would not have lost her belt within moments of receiving it in the first place. At convent, the rules apply to king and commoner alike. Once this class is finished, Novus Jula will shave Novus Arabella's head, and then Arabella will perform the same duty for her. And Nona realizes that she fucked up. And she holds the belt up and is like, actually, I have it. And Mistress Blade sees it and says, Nona has demonstrated an enduring and valuable truth. We may fight here and think that because our battles are unconstrained by rules that we truly understand what it is to make war. Do not be deceived. No real fight is bound by four walls. No real fight ends at a particular doorway. Fights end with defeat, and death is the only defeat a warrior understands. Nona, save such demonstrations of the secret war for Mistress Shade's class, where they will be better appreciated. So I think she assumes that Nona did this on purpose. I don't think she quite understands that this was like a genuine attempt to be helpful, and that she figures that this is like petty rivalry between these girls, but we'll see, because that's quite a speech to give in response to this belt. So they have to run laps. It takes absolutely no effort for Nona. She's so used to running, and I'm just like, what is that like? And finally, they talk about, there's this amazing speech from Sister Tallow about how, as animals, human beings are not particularly fast. They're not particularly strong. They only have the advantage of being smarter than most and being able to reason and predict things and whatever. So the weapons that she is going to equip them with are how best to use their cleverness, their precision. And that means learning how to leverage their weight, learning how to attack certain joints so that a person will not be able to get back up again. Sufficient speed makes every other aspect of combat irrelevant. If your opponent is a statue, it doesn't matter how long or how strong or skilled they might be. Find their throat or an eye and make an end of them. Speed is the way of the sisterhood. And this is when we get the fight between, and here's a line that I really, really love. You will learn about pain, fear, rage, and control. You will learn how to balance the first three to achieve the fourth. And you will carry those lessons into the gray class, where I will put weapons in your hands and teach you what it is to be a red sister. In gray class, I will teach you how to make the fuckers bleed. Okay, sister, damn! What? Like, is that the first time we've heard any of them say fuckers, I feel like? Except maybe, like, when What's-Her-Face picked Nona up, maybe. I can't remember. But, yeah, wow, okay. And also saying, like, how to balance the first three to achieve control. I feel like Nona's clearly on her way to doing that, like, obviously. So we get Jula and Arabella's fight, and this is, like, the moment that's a little bit shocking to everybody, because Jula is not a bad fighter. But it turns out Arabella is so fucking fast that it's, like, shocking. And Nona looked up at Sister Tallow for her reaction and found her, together with the whole class, staring at Arabella wide-eyed. The nun's surprise was mixed with some emotion that Nona couldn't identify, but it was strong enough to make the lines of old scars stand out against her paling skin. I feel like that emotion is, oh shit, I'm looking at the chosen one. We shall see. Arabella apparently has mixed blood, which is super duper rare. And there hadn't been a 3-blood in the 3 centuries since Aaron the Founder. If Arabella Jotsis showed the signs of the Garant line too, she would be stepping into history. So if she showed up Quantal or Marjal, she could be stepping into legend. So we'll see how that all starts to appear, if that is truly who she is. So then we have Gaina and Nona. And guys, here's the part that fucking murders my poor heart. Because despite the fact that she's making friends, Nona does not seem to trust that's real. And Nona is escaping Gaina's very quick attacks with minimal injury or effort of her own. And Gaina is starting to get faster and more aggressive as she's realizing she's like not keeping up with Nona. And then it says, Nona saw, even in the fractions their fight occupied, awareness start to enter Gaina's eyes, a widening, a dilation of pupils. She knew the look. She had seen it before in the eyes of her first friend when he had tossed her a fourth ball, and she added it to her juggling, thinking to please him. She let Gaina's fist catch her on the left shoulder and spun with the impact, allowing it to carry her to the floor. So the novices all are nodding in approval. Clara and Ruli, her friends, seem impressed. Only Gaina's gaze held a measure of confusion, and in Sister Tallow's there was a quiet speculation. So I like to think Gaina knows that she threw that fight and doesn't get it. She's like, why would you do that? And Sister Tallow also knows and is sort of trying to see, like, am I imagining that? But I think that's what I just saw. And I hope that they push her. I really hope that somebody starts to be like, girl, you can't keep doing this to yourself. I am running behind. I only have like 5 minutes left, so I have to speed this up. But that happens later during a scene in which they are basically walking like a ropes course, for lack of a better term. And it's meant to teach about like balance and keeping your mind centered and really focusing. And Nona manages to get further on her first try than any of them expect, but she looks up and sees them getting to the point that she fears, which is the point of almost like crossing over from being impressed to being resentful. And she lets herself fall, and from then on cannot seem to get the magic back because she is just too worried about offending and upsetting the people around her to focus on just what she's capable of. And I talked about this last episode, that I have experienced that, and it is a terrible thing to do to yourself. And it really feels like if you are a lonely person, that's the only way to make sure that you remain friends with people. Because how can they be friends with somebody who's like better than them at everything and without even really trying? But it's heartbreaking. It really, really is, you know? Because, like, if Nona did not worry about that, what could she be capable of? What could she do that I'm really hoping that she gets a chance to, like, stretch out completely. So she goes back to the dormitory, and Nona asks Gaina if she did all right. Or no, Gaina's already asleep. She asks Ruli. And Ruli's like, yeah, the only person that is quicker than Gaina is Clara. And Clara has been told she's the fastest the convent has seen in years. So if you're third fastest, that's pretty fucking good. And they talk about other convents, Silent Patience, Chaste Devotion, Garen's Crag, but they're at Sweet Mercy. And this is the only one that teaches the blade. And they talk for a little longer about, well, first there's like Arabella and Jula having to have their heads shaved, and Arabella does not handle it well. Pretty much freaks the fuck out. And Nona, on the one hand, kind of understands because her hair was gorgeous, but on the other hand, it's like, oh man, she is just really taking this hard, and if this is the worst thing she's ever had to go through, that's like, I just don't even know how to relate to a person who this is a true hardship for them. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, and she says, we're friends then? Friend can be a dangerous word, Nona said. Clara laughed. Friend, really? It is if you mean it. Nona didn't smile. She thought of Armando and of Saida. Friend was a bond. Much of what people did, how they acted, confused Nona, but friend she understood. A friend you would die for, or kill for. Well, I mean it. Clara let her own smile slip. Then we are. It seemed enough for Clara. She rose from Nona's bed and went to her own, flipping the penny once and humming some tune, low and sweet. So, another moment that I really like of Nona realizing that one of the top windows is opened a crack because it gets so warm in here that they have to let a little bit of cool air in. And she cannot wrap her head around that because being this kind of completely warm is something she really never thought she would ever be. It just seemed like this was something for the rich and that was it. And here she is, fully fed and warm, and she just doesn't really understand how this is happening. And then we get this, like, interesting flashback of Raymel fighting. And the reaction, and Raymel's the guy who, like, basically almost killed Saida. Well, kind of did. Well, we'll get back to... you know what happened. And she's remembering the way that Saida reacted, that she was going to be, like, fighting, supposedly, but that she couldn't deal with watching him hurt people. And Nona and her are talking about that this is, like, a real drawback, and she's like, maybe there's a way that I can learn to, like, help heal people instead. And they realize that, like, the one guy who does stitch up wounds is pretty old, so maybe he needs some help, and that might be a potential option for her. But then the dream, because it's like she's thinking about this memory, but then it transitions into a dream as she falls asleep, and she dreams that she is hurting Saida. And it's a terrible, like, you know, it's really how she feels this went down, that she is the one who killed her friend. And it's fucking horrible, you know? She's 9 years old, I want to remind you all. She's 9. So she wakes up because this dream, like, forced her awake. And there's this really weird moment at the back of her mind. The dream carried on as if it neither wanted her attention nor required her permission to proceed. She had been following something, a line that ran its narrow path with danger to either side. On one flank a dark and consuming hunger, on the other a blindness, fierce as staring at the sun. And somehow she had been following someone else at the same time, a black-clad, swift certain moving through a starless night, plotting a sure path between high buildings. The figure had found what it sought, looked up, reached out to find cold stone walls, and had started to climb. So I feel that this is like... Because Nora later on notices that it's gotten a little cooler in the room, and there is something like... I feel like there's a combination of things happening. That Nona is finding the path, which is they try to talk about later in class, and Clara straight up is like, oh, she's Hunska, she won't be able to do it. But I think she can, actually, and I think this was it. And I think that she somehow gets into the mind of somebody who came into their sleeping quarters, climbing this wall, because the window is a little open, and I think that's what it is. And they wake up, and there is a knife driven into the headboard of her bed. And when she looks over, she sees Arabella staring at her and figures that Arabella maybe was going to try and hurt her. I don't think that's it at all. I feel that Arabella realizes that maybe she isn't the chosen one, that everybody has told her that she is, and she's starting to think maybe not. And she's resenting this bitch for it. But whatever it is, this knife appearing here means something to Arabella that it doesn't mean to Nona for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm out of time. I went over. I totally did not get to the path class, but I feel like at this moment we don't really need to worry about it. But I'll try and cover that later. And there's also a thing with Sister Tallow, how she has this, like, hurt arm and a, like, cut on the side of her face, and nobody really knows what happened, but I feel like somebody guarded... There was something happened in that dorm. Something happened, and I don't know what, but we'll find out, hopefully. Oh, and Nona runs into Hessa, the girl who is using the crutch, and they used to be paired up at this other place, but she got really sick. So she has been here, but she's been in the sanatorium because she had a cough. So I'm sorry, Martin, that I wasn't able to finish everything. I spent too long talking about, but I feel like I covered like the important bits, so hopefully that's all right. But thank you all again so much for listening. Hope that you enjoyed it. And I will be seeing you apparently pretty soon with a new episode. So yay for that. And with that, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.